Hi, my name's Venora, and last night my mother-in-law knocked my dinner to the floor and said, "If you want it, lick it off the floor like a dog." My husband? He just watched. No anger, no shame, just silence. That silence. It wasn't new. It had been sitting at my table for years, wearing his face, feeding her cruelty. But here's the part no one saw coming. I smiled, fixed my blouse, and whispered 3 words that shattered them both. And the next morning, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did something far, far worse. But before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from right now? And what would you have done if it were your plate? The moment we pulled into Claudine's driveway, my stomach coiled like a spring. Joel didn't say much, just fiddled with the steering wheel before killing the engine. I looked at him, hoping for a smile, a word, anything that made me feel like we were walking into this together. He stepped out without a word. Claudine's house looked the same as always, big, pristine, and cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The lights glowed warm, but there was no warmth in her eyes when she opened the door. Just that tight smile of hers, tight enough to cut glass. "Well, look who finally made it," she said, her voice syrupy sweet with a sour bite underneath. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." I smiled. Traffic was heavier than usual. "Mm-hmm," she hummed, stepping aside to let us in. "Dinner's almost ready. Don't worry, I made enough. Even for you." I didn't miss the pause before that last part. Inside, the table was already set, too perfectly. Claudine didn't do casual. Every plate, napkin, and fork was placed with surgical precision, and the smell of roast chicken filled the house like a trap. I could feel Joel shrinking beside me, his shoulders folding inward. He knew this wasn't going to be just dinner. "Go ahead and sit," she chirped. "I'll bring out the rolls." I took a seat at the end of the table, the spot she always left for me, furthest from her, closest to the kitchen. Joel sat across from me, already looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "You look different," Claudine said when she returned, eyeing me up and down. "That blouse is bold, but I guess some women like to draw attention to themselves." I smiled tightly. "Just something I threw on." She scoffed lightly, placing the basket of rolls right in front of Joel. "I'm sure you did." Dinner started quietly. I served myself small portions, careful not to take too much of anything. Claudine watched every move I made like a hawk, ready to pounce. Joel busied himself with buttering his roll, pretending not to notice the tension thickening between us. "So, Venora," she said, chewing slowly, "you still working at that little, what is it again? That counseling place?" "Private practice," I replied. "Oh, right. Helping people who can't help themselves. That's noble. I suppose Joel doesn't mind carrying the real load." I swallowed hard. "We share responsibilities." She laughed, sharp and hollow. "Sure you do." Joel stayed silent, staring down at his chicken like it held the secrets of the universe. I kept my eyes on my plate. Years of comments like this had taught me one thing: don't take the bait. But tonight felt different. Like something was unraveling inside me, stitch by stitch. "You know," Claudine went on, "back in my day, wives made dinner, not therapy appointments. But I guess times have changed." I set my fork down. Joel cleared his throat but said nothing. I looked at him, really looked. Nothing. Not a flicker, not even discomfort, just the same blank stare I'd come to resent. The man I married, the man I thought would fight for me, wasn't even trying. And then it happened. As I reached for the gravy, Claudine accidentally bumped my arm. My plate slid, hit the edge of the table, and crashed to the floor in a mess of glass, potatoes, and roasted carrots. "Oh my!" she gasped, not even trying to hide her smirk. "What a mess." I bent slightly, grabbing a napkin, my cheeks burning, and then she said it. "If you want dinner, dear, lick it off the floor." I froze. Joel said nothing. He didn't look at me, didn't look at her, just kept chewing. I sat upright, napkin still in hand, my chest tight. The room was dead silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't let her see me break. I adjusted my blouse slowly, smoothed my skirt, stood up with calm so cold it felt electric. 3 words. I looked her in the eye and said 3 words that made the air leave the room. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I only said 3 words that froze the room. I am done. Simple. Quiet. But it hung in the air like a clap of thunder no one saw coming. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence said everything. Knives stopped mid-cut. Chews were half swallowed. Someone's fork clinked against porcelain. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I said it with calm, like I'd rehearsed it 100 times, even though it had just come to me. Claudine scoffed, breaking the tension with that dry laugh she always used when she felt uncomfortable but couldn't let herself show it. "Well, it's about time you said something." "What's that supposed to mean anyway, Venora?" I didn't answer. My gaze stayed locked on hers. I wasn't giving her a second round. There were no more explanations, no pleading for decency. Not tonight. She waved her hand like I was a fly she could swat. "Oh, please. You're always so dramatic." "I am done?" "With what?" "Dinner?" That laugh again, louder this time, aimed at the table like an invitation for the others to join in. But no one did. Joel, still sitting across from me, didn't lift his eyes. He reached for his glass, sipped his water slowly, and stared straight down like the bottom of that cup held the escape he was praying for. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my throat, but I kept my hands steady. I adjusted the edge of my sleeve, tucked in a strand of hair behind my ear, and let the stillness work for me. "You've always been too sensitive," Claudine added, her voice getting sharper now that no one was rushing to back her up. "Every little comment, you twisted into some personal attack." I finally let my eyes slide across the table. 2 of Joel's cousins sat to my left. One kept chewing slowly, clearly uncomfortable. The other shifted in her seat, eyes flicking between me and Claudine. Joel's aunt, the one who wore a too-tight cardigan and pearls that clinked every time she moved, shook her head just slightly. Not at me, at Claudine. So they saw it. All of them. They'd always seen it. They just never said a word. That's the thing about family. They'll sit through abuse as long as it's dressed up with casseroles and prayer before meals. I stood there for another few seconds, letting the weight of it all settle in. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I wasn't trying to win some battle of words. I was finished playing in an arena where the rules changed every time Claudine felt insecure. I stepped back from the table slowly. My chair barely made a sound. "Where do you think you're going?" Claudine's voice was sharper now, the edge finally cracking. "You're going to walk out in the middle of dinner? Is that what a grown woman does? Storms off like a child?" "I didn't storm off," I said, my voice steady. "I just stood up." Joel flinched. Not because of the volume, I hadn't raised my voice once, but because he knew the difference. He knew that after years of keeping the peace, swallowing my dignity for the sake of keeping the family whole, this was the moment I stopped pretending. I turned to him, gave him every opportunity to look me in the eye. Just once. He didn't. My heart didn't break. It didn't shatter or drop or any of those things people describe in stories. It just hardened. A little bit. I wasn't angry at Claudine. Not really. You can't be mad at a storm for being a storm. You just learn to stop building your house on the coast. But Joel? He was supposed to be shelter. He was supposed to be the one who said, "Enough." The one who stood when I was pushed. The one who said, "She's my wife. That's enough." Instead, he sat, just like always, Just like when she mocked my job, or picked apart how I spoke, or smirked when I brought a dish she didn't like. He sat there, sipping water, chewing quietly. I didn't need him to scream. I didn't need some grand defense. I just needed him to act like I mattered. I moved past the table without another word. I didn't slam the door or make a dramatic exit. I just walked through the hallway, grabbed my purse from the side table, and stepped outside. The cool night air hit me like a bomb. I stood on the porch for a moment, taking in the sound of crickets, the distant hum of a neighbor's TV. Behind me, I heard muffled voices. Claudine, trying to regain control of her stage. Joel, probably still sipping water. The front door stayed shut. And I realized something right then. I had always been waiting for someone to come after me. A mother, a husband, anyone, not anymore. Because sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't from your enemy, it's from the one sitting right beside you. We drove home in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't fill space. It stretches it, expands it, makes everything louder inside your own head. The hum of the car, the faint rattle of a window that wouldn't quite shut right, the turn signal's slow, steady click. Joel kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward like the road ahead had all the answers he didn't want to face. When we pulled into the driveway, I didn't wait for him. I unbuckled, stepped out, and walked up to the front door like muscle memory. I didn't slam anything, didn't sigh, didn't look back. Inside, I turned on the hall light, kicked off my shoes, and headed straight to our bedroom. I didn't even bother changing out of my clothes. I just lay down on top of the comforter, still in the blouse Claudine mocked earlier, the one she said made me look like I was trying too hard. Joel came in 20 minutes later. I heard him close the front door gently, the way someone does when they don't want to be accused of coming home angry. He lingered in the kitchen for a while, maybe pouring water, maybe pretending he was doing something useful. Eventually, I felt the mattress shift under his weight. He didn't speak. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. The words kept echoing in my head. Not hers, mine. I am done. I thought saying it would feel like a release, a breath of fresh air. But now, it clung to me, heavy and damp, like a wet coat I couldn't peel off. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, old memories did. There was that Thanksgiving 4 years ago. Claudine introduced me to her neighbor as Joel's wife, not really family, but she's around a lot. Then she laughed like it was a joke, and Joel just chuckled along. I remember standing there holding a tray of deviled eggs I had made from scratch, wondering why I felt like an intruder in a life I'd built with him. Or Joel's birthday, 2 summers ago. We were all gathered in the backyard, family, friends, the whole scene. Someone pulled out a camera to snap a group photo. Everyone got into position. I stood next to Joel, naturally, but then Claudine waved me off. Just family for this one. And he didn't say a word. He just stepped forward, smiling, while I backed out of frame. There were 100 moments like that. Tiny cuts, sharp enough to sting, never deep enough to bleed out, but they added up. One day you realize you're covered in bruises you can't name, wounds you were told didn't exist. Tonight was just the final slice. I rolled over to face him. He was on his back, arms folded behind his head, staring up like he didn't feel me watching. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. His eyes didn't shift. "About what?" "You know what." He took a breath, long and slow, and finally turned toward me. "It's not worth it, Venora. She's always been like that." "Pushing back just makes it worse." I felt my stomach turn. "So the answer is to let her humiliate me in front of your entire family?" "She was out of line, sure, but what do you want me to do? Get into a screaming match over dinner?" "No," I said, quieter now. "I wanted you to stand next to me, not behind her." He sat up, running a hand through his hair. "You always think I'm choosing sides. I'm not. I'm just trying to keep the peace." "And how's that working out for you?" I asked. He didn't answer. I sat up too, pulling my knees close to my chest. You know, I used to think she was the problem. The digs, the jabs, the little power plays. But it's not just her. It's you. It's how you let it happen, over and over. You've made silence your shield. Joel got up, walking toward the bathroom. He paused in the doorway. Look, Venora, I'm tired. Can we not do this tonight? No, I said, because I've been tired for years. He shut the door behind him. I stayed on the bed, blinking at nothing. My mind was loud again, but this time, it wasn't echoing. It was building. I had spent so long trying to be gracious, trying to be kind, trying to be the bigger person. But that role had become a costume, one I wore while I quietly erased myself to make others comfortable. No more. If no one was going to protect my place at the table, then I would carve it myself. That night I promised myself something. The next time they erased me, I would not disappear quietly. The sun was high and the air hung thick with early summer heat when Joel pulled into Claudine's driveway 2 weeks later. The lawn was freshly mowed, hydrangeas trimmed too neatly, and a patriotic flag swayed from the porch. Her idea of charm. From the passenger seat, I stared at the same front door that, last time, had swallowed my dignity whole. Joel turned off the ignition but didn't move. You sure you want to do this? I opened the door without answering. The question wasn't for my benefit. It was his excuse to pretend this wasn't just another quiet surrender. We walked toward the house. The voices from the backyard drifted into the air. Laughter, glasses clinking, someone calling out to a child. The door opened before we knocked. And there she was. Claudine greeted us with a syrupy smile, arms wide like she'd been waiting on royalty. There you are. We were just saying, where are Joel and his lovely wife? Her voice was too loud, too sweet, her hug just a little too long. She smelled of overly strong perfume and the kind of confidence only people like her could afford. Inside, everything looked polished and curated. A tray of stuffed mushrooms sat on the buffet, the dining table was set like a magazine spread, and the backyard was crawling with relatives, neighbors, people who'd only show up for food and gossip. Claudine led us through the house like she was giving a tour, her hand brushing Joel's shoulder every few steps. So glad you came, she told him. Everyone's been asking about you. I followed quietly, letting her put on her show. Joel nodded, smiled when spoken to, offered tight-lipped thanks and good to see yous. He didn't look at me once. Dinner was served outside under string lights and a wide white tent. Folding chairs lined long plastic tables, covered with floral cloths Claudine likely ironed herself. A band of bugs buzzed in the distance. The plates were paper, but everything else tried too hard to feel elegant. I took a seat beside Joel. Claudine stood across from us, drink in hand, chatting up 2 new faces, neighbors, I guessed. And this, she said loudly, pointing toward me, is Joel's wife. She's sweet, not much into our little traditions though, bless her heart. A few chuckles fluttered around the table. Someone murmured, "Oh, we've all got one of those in the family." I felt my cheeks flush, but I didn't look away. I watched her sip her drink like it had washed her words clean. Joel sat motionless, chewing something that didn't need that much chewing. I waited for him to say anything, to correct her, to shift the conversation, even to glance at me with guilt. But his fork stayed busy and his eyes stayed down. So I leaned forward, letting my voice cut through the hum of casual conversation. "Claudine," I said, just loud enough to reach her and no one else. "If you cross that line again, you'll regret it." Her smile faltered for half a second, but she recovered quickly. She tilted her head and let out a sharp little laugh, the kind people use to mock without saying anything directly. "Oh, honey," she purred, "you know I just tease. That's what families do." "No," I replied, still even. "That's what bullies do. Families respect boundaries." That time, the silence spread further. Someone shifted in their seat. A fork dropped. Joel finally looked up, but at me, not at her. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open like he wanted to stop me but didn't know how. He leaned toward me, whispering, "Why would you say that? Not here." I didn't answer him. Because he already knew. Because saying nothing had become his specialty. I turned my gaze back to my plate. My hands were steady, my voice had been calm, but inside, I could feel something uncoiling. Years of pushing things down, of excusing behavior that would never be acceptable anywhere else, of pretending silence was peace. I looked around the table. An aunt I barely spoke to glanced my way, quickly turned back. A cousin cleared his throat. No one defended me, but no one laughed either. Claudine, still standing, let out a brittle chuckle. "Well," she said too brightly, "let's not let a little sass ruin our supper. Who wants more wine?" She walked away before anyone answered. Joel said nothing again. I didn't expect him to. I didn't feel broken this time. I felt aware. She had crossed the line so many times, but this was the first time I had drawn one. And even if no one took my side, I had finally taken it myself. Later that evening, while people milled about with plastic dessert plates and conversations faded into small talk, I stood on the back porch alone, looking out at the backyard I had never been welcomed into. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt ready. She had built her house on control, and tonight I chipped the first crack into its foundation. I had drawn the line, and Claudine, of course, was determined to cross it. She didn't wait long. Barely an hour after my warning, Claudine found a new stage, her living room, surrounded by wine glasses and polite laughter. The dinner had ended, plates scraped clean, and most of the guests now lounged on the couch and folding chairs she'd dragged in to make it feel cozy. She caught the attention of a neighbor couple, the Kendricks, I think, who had just moved in 2 doors down. The woman wore pearl studs and a fake smile. The man clutched his glass like it might save him from social interaction. Claudine's voice carried easily, even in her best, confidential tone. "You know," she said, with that half-smile she always used before a punchline, "Venora's sweet. But Joel? He's the real rock. She doesn't really, well, contribute much. He carries everything." She gave a little chuckle, pretending it was nothing. I was 2 feet away. She didn't care. Maybe that was the point. The woman beside her let out an awkward laugh. The husband glanced at his shoes. Joel, sitting with a drink in his hand, looked at the floor like it might open up and swallow him. And I stayed still. There's a kind of numbness that shows up when you're tired of flinching. I'd already burned through the shock, the disbelief. Now it was just something cold settling in. But that didn't mean I didn't feel it. I looked at Joel. Just looked. Waiting. He shifted in his seat, then stood abruptly. "I'm gonna get another bottle," he mumbled, heading for the kitchen like it was an escape hatch. He left me there. Again. The air in the room didn't change. Conversations picked back up. Someone turned on a soft jazz playlist. Claudine disappeared into another circle of guests, satisfied with her little victory. I stayed rooted, letting the sounds blur around me. Her voice echoed in my head. She doesn't really contribute. All the things she didn't see, couldn't be bothered to see. The long nights I stayed up helping Joel get through his job burnout. The bills I helped pay when his hours were cut. The family birthdays I remembered when no one else did. The casseroles I made for her after her hip surgery that she later told people came from one of the neighbors. None of it ever counted, because it didn't fit her idea of value. And Joel? He never once spoke up to tell her otherwise. His silence had a shape. It was a hollowed-out space beside me, loud and growing. I sank deeper into the couch cushion, suddenly exhausted. The kind of tired that isn't about sleep, but about carrying too much for too long. I don't know how long I sat there. At some point, Claudine turned down the lights slightly, probably thinking it made the room feel more elegant. Guests shifted to smaller groups. Someone opened another bottle. My fingers traced the edge of a coaster on the coffee table, just to stay grounded. And then, out of nowhere, a hand rested lightly on my shoulder. It was Alma, an old family friend I barely knew. She leaned in, speaking just to me. "Don't let her get to you," she whispered. "You're stronger than she thinks." I looked up, surprised. She smiled gently and walked away. It wasn't much, just a few words, but they landed in me like warm water on frozen ground. For a breath, I believed them. Maybe I really was stronger than she thought. Maybe I didn't have to keep swallowing this version of myself she kept trying to rewrite. But that hope didn't last long. By the time we were in the car driving home, Joel hadn't said a word. Not in the hallway, not on the porch, not while unlocking the car. The drive was silent, save for the hum of tires on pavement and the occasional click of the turn signal. I stared out the window, my hands folded tightly in my lap. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't mention the remark, the neighbors, the way Claudine had erased me in front of strangers. He just drove. I think part of me hoped, deep down in the parts still willing to believe in small miracles, that he'd say something when we got home, that he'd pour us each a glass of wine, sit down at the kitchen table, and finally see me. Instead, he parked in the driveway, mumbled, "I'm tired," and walked inside. I stayed in the car another 5 minutes. The porch light flickered once, then went still. In that moment, I realized something cruel. Hope had started to feel like a trick I kept playing on myself. A lie I whispered just loud enough to drown out the truth. That night, I almost convinced myself silence was survival. But then the truth came knocking. The house was quiet, too quiet for how loud my mind had become. I sat in the corner of the couch where I always landed after long days, knees tucked beneath me, arms crossed tight. The porch light outside still burned, but everything inside felt dim. Joel had already disappeared into the bedroom. No goodnight, no apology, no acknowledgement. Just silence, like always. I stared at the dark window, the reflection of my own face faint in the glass. I looked like someone I didn't recognize. Tired, hollow, almost resigned. For a moment, longer than I care to admit, I actually considered letting it all go. Again. Maybe it was easier to keep the peace. Maybe I was the problem, pushing too hard for decency in a family that mistook cruelty for tradition. Maybe I was asking too much. I exhaled, leaning my head back against the cushion. Maybe silence really is survival, I whispered aloud. But even as the words left my mouth, they tasted like surrender. Joel's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Once, then again. He'd forgotten it in the living room. That wasn't unusual. He often left things behind, especially when he didn't want to deal with them. I didn't plan to pick it up. I wasn't snooping. I was just restless. My fingers hovered, then grabbed it without thinking. The screen was still lit. A text from someone named Carson, Claudine's cousin, popped up in a gray bubble. Claudine was right. Venora doesn't really belong in this family. I blinked, read it again. Then the scroll happened. I couldn't stop myself. The thread was long, too long. "Joel, man, you should have said something back at Christmas. She looked ridiculous in that sweater. Claudine's got patience. I would have told her off by now. Still don't get what you see in her. She just doesn't fit our kind." And Joel's replies? Not a word of protest. Just things like, "Ha ha, yeah." "I know, bro. Don't tell her you told me this, LOL. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. It wasn't just that they laughed at me. It wasn't just that I'd been the butt of the joke for years. It was that the man I married, the one who vowed to protect, to honor, had read every word and said nothing. No defense, no pushback. Just casual, complicit laughter. The sting wasn't fresh, it was familiar. But this time, it was undeniable. That moment snapped something in me, not in a dramatic, shouting kind of way. No tears, no slammed doors, just a stillness that turned sharp. All the memories started tumbling back, not just Claudine's latest jab or the dinner table insults, but the little humiliations I had archived like scars. When she said I wasn't Southern enough to understand their family traditions. When she called me sweet girl like I was a hired hand. When Joel told me, she's just old-fashioned. Don't make a big deal. The silence wasn't survival, it was erasure, and I had helped them do it. To me. I sat up straighter, jaw clenched, heart pounding but focused. I tapped the screen again, this time deliberately. I scrolled back through the messages, screenshotted every one, saved them to my cloud drive, then emailed them to myself. Just in case. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. But it was about remembering. Because someday, they were going to try and spin the story. Pretend it never happened. Pretend I overreacted, misunderstood, misremembered. Not this time. I set the phone back on the table, gently. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. And as I stood up and turned out the living room light, I whispered quietly to no one. They wanted silence. They will get it. But not the kind they expect. This time, I wouldn't disappear. I'd become the pause they couldn't ignore. The silence before the storm. The air outside Claudine's house felt thicker than usual, like even the wind knew what kind of night it was walking into. Joel and I arrived just after 6. The sun hadn't quite set yet, but the light was fading fast, early autumn creeping into everything. Claudine's porch was lined with pumpkins and mums, perfectly arranged for the guests she was determined to impress. Her door was already open when we walked up the steps, as if she'd been waiting. Joel walked ahead of me, as always. I followed a few paces behind, steady. I didn't fidget with my dress. I didn't glance around nervously like I used to. I wasn't there to survive the evening. I was there to watch. She greeted us with syrup in her voice. Joel, sweetie, come in, come in. Venora, you too. The you too always carried weight. I used to flinch at it. Tonight, I let it slide past me like wind through a screen door. The living room was already full. Cousins, uncles, 2 distant aunts, a neighbor couple Claudine invited to widen the circle, as she liked to say. The table was set with her good china, the air tinged with roast and something lemony. It looked warm, inviting. But underneath, everything pulsed with tension. I nodded at a few familiar faces. Some nodded back. A few smiled too politely. One cousin barely met my eyes. I didn't blame her. They all knew something was off. That's the thing about people who sit through cruelty. They may stay silent, but silence doesn't mean ignorance. We sat, the wine poured, dishes passed. Chatter buzzed about the weather, football, gas prices. Claudine was in full hostess mode, charming and loud, controlling every conversational thread. I could feel it coming. I knew her well enough now to read her rhythms. The way she waited until glasses were full, guests relaxed, then pounced with precision. And sure enough, somewhere between the green beans and the cornbread, she said it. Well, bless her heart, Venora's really just decoration at this table. Pretty to look at, but not exactly contributing. A soft laugh fluttered around the room. From one cousin, a neighbor. Joel didn't laugh, but he didn't stop it either. His eyes flicked down to his plate, fork to mashed potatoes, mouth tight but closed. That used to hurt most of all, his silence. Tonight it confirmed what I already knew. He had chosen his comfort over my dignity long ago. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch, thick and humming. Then, calmly, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I didn't even look at it. Just set it face down on the table beside my wine glass. I turned my gaze to Claudine. Funny, I said, soft but clear, how words travel, even when you think they won't. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room stiffened. Claudine's smile faltered. Not enough to draw suspicion to anyone else, just enough for me to see it. Her eyes narrowed, flicked to the phone, then back to me. Joel looked up, confused, sensing something but not understanding. Claudine gave a little laugh, brittle. "Oh, honey, don't take everything so personally. We're just teasing, that's how family is." "Exactly," I said, matching her tone. "And that's why it matters." A cousin shifted in her seat. One of the neighbors coughed. Joel cleared his throat like he was about to speak, but didn't. Claudine tried to change the subject, asked about someone's new car. The conversation staggered forward, but the tension didn't dissolve. It grew, quiet but sharp, like a string pulled too tight. I didn't touch my phone again. I didn't need to. The point had been made. They didn't know what I had. They didn't know how far it stretched, how many messages, how many names, how many months of proof, and I wasn't going to show my cards. Not yet. But I watched Claudine watch me for the rest of the evening. She laughed too loudly, smiled too much, spoke with her hands just a bit more than usual. She was unraveling by inches, unsure if I'd do something, say something, reveal something. That fear, it felt familiar, but tonight it wasn't mine. It was hers. I felt it buzz under my skin, not triumph exactly, but something steadier, like the ground finally shifting back beneath my feet. Because power doesn't always come in noise. Sometimes it comes in restraint, in watching the person who always speaks feel shaken by the one who no longer needs to. For the rest of dinner, Joel barely looked at me. Maybe he didn't know what I had seen. Or maybe he did, and was praying I wouldn't bring it up here. Either way, I saw no fight in him, no spine, just shadows. That used to terrify me, feeling alone even next to the man I married. Now I'd accepted it. Because sometimes, standing alone is safer than standing beside someone who won't protect you. Claudine thought she had silenced me. She never realized silence can also be a weapon. The house had grown quieter, but the air felt heavier, almost electric. The chatter that had filled the dining room an hour ago had faded into a thin murmur. People were eating slower, forks clinking softer, every sound magnified by the tension that wrapped itself around us like invisible wire. I sat straighter in my chair, my palms resting loosely in my lap. The phone stayed face down beside my wineglass, a simple rectangle that seemed to have shifted the power in the room just by existing. Joel sat to my right, staring at his plate as if it held some escape. Across from me, Claudine's smile was back, but it wasn't the same. It was thinner, taut at the edges. She broke the silence first. "She's bluffing," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Venora wouldn't dare." Her voice was sharp, but the tremor in it betrayed her. She tilted her head and gave me a look she'd perfected over years of subtle war. The kind that said she was still in control, still the one holding the reins. "Go on then," she added. "Prove you belong here." The words landed like a slap. I saw the neighbor couple shift uncomfortably. One of the cousins pressed her lips together, as if suppressing a comment. Joel didn't move at all. I didn't blink. I reached out, turned the phone over slowly, and unlocked the screen. My thumb didn't shake. "I'm done with proving," I said softly. "But I do have something to share." The room stilled. Claudine's smirk faltered, only for a heartbeat, but I caught it. I scrolled to the message. "This is from your niece," I said, looking straight at Claudine. She wrote, "Claudine was right. Venora doesn't belong here." Gasps rustled through the room like wind through dry leaves. I let the words sit there a moment before continuing. Joel saw this. He saw others just like it. He said nothing. He chose nothing. Joel's fork clattered onto his plate. He opened his mouth, closed it again. A few relatives stared at him, then at me, then at Claudine. The mask cracked. Claudine's cheeks flushed. She let out a laugh, too loud, too brittle. "Oh, please, this is pathetic. Digging through people's phones. You're making a fool of yourself." "No," I said evenly. I'm showing what you've been doing for years, just not in your own voice." She slammed her hand lightly on the table. "You're unstable," she hissed. "Obsessive. Always twisting things. You think you're some kind of victim here, but you're just dramatic." Her words spilled like oil, slick and smothering, but they didn't stick this time. Joel stayed frozen, but his silence felt different now. Not just absence, but a choice I could see in real time. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't defending himself. He was sitting still, hoping it would all pass over him like rain on a tin roof. It was then, in that strange clarity that comes at the edge of breaking, that I knew this was the last battle. Claudine wouldn't stop until someone stopped her. Joel wouldn't be that someone. I reached for the napkin beside my plate, the same kind she'd used the first night she humiliated me, when my tears had soaked through the cloth as I bent to clean up my dinner from her floor. I held it between my fingers for a moment, then laid it gently on the table, sliding it toward her plate. "This covered my tears the first night you tried to erase me," I said, my voice low but steady. "Tonight, it covers my goodbye." For a heartbeat, the room went utterly still. Even the neighbor couple stopped breathing. Claudine's hand hovered above her fork, her lips parting, but no sound coming out. I stood, my chair scraping softly against the floor. My hands didn't tremble. No one tried to stop me, not Claudine, not Joel, not a single person. I walked out of that dining room, leaving the napkin folded neatly on Claudine's plate. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and for the first time, Claudine had no audience, only silence she couldn't control. The door shut behind me with a soft thud, but inside me, something louder had closed, a door I would not reopen. The sky was already dark by the time I got to the car, and Joel followed a minute later, silent as always. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer words. He drove home like a man dragging his own shadow behind him. We didn't speak that night. I walked straight into the bedroom, peeled off the dress that still smelled like Claudine's perfume and roast chicken, and stood under the shower until the water turned lukewarm. Joel slept on the edge of the bed like he was afraid to touch the aftermath of what had just happened. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't wait for his voice. I didn't reach out, hoping he'd break the silence. I had found something stronger than his apology, my own voice. The next morning, while the house was still quiet, I poured myself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for a therapist. I wasn't looking for advice. I was looking for resolution. By 9 a.m., I was sitting across from a woman named Lorraine in a law office downtown. A calm, firm presence who didn't flinch when I told her, "I'm not here to threaten. I'm here to act." We discussed everything: property, accounts, the joint savings Joel's mother had helped us manage, the way Claudine's name was unofficially tied into too many things that bore my signature. Lorraine nodded as she typed, then looked up. "You're not just getting out," she said. "You're protecting yourself." By noon, the divorce papers were drafted. By 2 p.m., my personal savings and retirement were legally transferred to a new separate account under my sole name. By dinner time, Joel was standing in the doorway of our kitchen, holding the documents in his trembling hands. His face was pale. "You're serious?" I looked him in the eye, calm as the stillness after a storm. "I've never been more." He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. "I didn't want this." "No," I said quietly. "You just didn't want to do anything to stop it." He stood there for a while longer, but eventually he walked out of the room, like a man realizing too late that the silence he once depended on now condemned him. Later that evening, I addressed one final envelope. It contained a copy of the legal paperwork and a short handwritten note. "This is the last check you'll ever cash in my name." I didn't yell. I didn't slam doors. I didn't show up at her house or call the family into a meeting. I mailed it. Neat, simple, surgical. When the letter arrived 2 days later, I heard Claudine call Joel in a rage. I didn't need to listen. I knew the tone. Her empire wasn't falling, but it was tilting. Her access to our money, our home, our marriage was ending. And Joel? He didn't scream. He didn't apologize. He just sat in the same chair he always did, the silence around him heavier than it had ever been. I took my time packing. I wasn't rushing to leave in anger. I was stepping into my own peace. The last thing I folded was a single cloth napkin, the one I'd placed on her plate the night before. I held it for a moment, then tucked it into my bag. That night, as I stood at the threshold of my new apartment, key in hand, I thought of that napkin. The first time it covered my tears. The second time it covered my goodbye. And now it covered nothing, because I didn't hide anymore. Some wounds never fully heal, but some scars aren't weakness. They're proof you survived. And that, in the end, was my victory.